Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our axle. The first thing we want to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, remove your center cover here, all 5 lug nuts with a 21mm socket, and then the wheel. Let's go ahead and put some penetrant on this. And this right up here. Now let's use a 12mm. We'll remove this right here. Let's take a nice pry bar, get in between this area here and separate this. Now let's use our 12mm socket on this bolt right here, remove this. Grab onto this, give it a little wiggle, separate it. Grab that caliper, we're going to slide this, separate it. Inspect your caliper, make sure you don't see any fluid. If you do, it's brake fluid, and then of course you'd have to replace this caliper. Assuming it looks good, let's go ahead and set it aside, making sure we put no pressure on our flex hose. Let's get the pads out of here. Moving along, we're going to use a 14mm socket and remove both of our caliper bracket bolts. The first one, I'm just going to loosen up until it's almost all the way out. I'll leave it in there a couple threads and then we'll fully remove the other one. There's one. Let's go ahead and get this one out of there as well. Remove the bracket, set it aside. Now let's move along to using our hammer. We're going to carefully hit along these areas here to try to break this free. Be very careful not to damage any of your studs. Now if your rotor doesn't want to come off like ours, we're just going to go ahead and take this screwdriver, carefully remove this boot right here. You don't want to lose this or damage it. We're going to be reusing it. And pop it right out of there. Now we're just going to spin this until we can find our adjuster on the inside. Once you have it lined up, just go ahead and take your screwdriver or small pry bar. We're going to go ahead and put it in here and we're going to try to de-adjust that star. Go this way. When you try to de-adjust, you want to go ahead and put it straight in, up against it, and then we're going to gently lift it up. Give this a little wiggle. Remove it from the vehicle. Now the next thing we have to do to be able to get this bearing out of the way is to go ahead and turn it so that this larger hole on this hub surface itself exposes the mounting bolts. You're going to find 4 mounting bolts behind here. Let's go ahead and use a 14mm with an extension and go ahead and remove them all. There's that one. Do the same to all. This one lined up. Grab onto that bearing, we're going to give it a little wiggle and remove it from the vehicle. Once that's out of the way, let's continue on by cleaning up this entire area. You want to try to make sure that you get out any of the gunk or debris that you might happen to find inside. Next, we're just going to take a little bit of grease and we're just going to essentially go right along this area here. You don't necessarily need to go ahead and put on too much of it. It's just to help lubricate it so we can put in the brand new bearing. All right, now it's time to install the brand new bearing. Just have a quick look at it. You can see that 2 of the holes are separated further than the other 2. These 2 are going to be up top. Let's just go ahead and line it up. I'm just going to slide it right in here. Okay. And now we're just going to go ahead and line up this hole with one of the corresponding holes. We'll start in that bolt, start in all the rest of the bolts, and then we'll start tightening them up. Let's clean up the threads on our mounting bolts, and we're also going to add a little bit of red thread locker. Just right on the socket. Start that in. Like I said, we're just going to start in all 4 of these bolts. Once we have them all started, we'll snug them up, and then we'll torque them to manufacturer's specification. Now we can torque these to 59 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time to put the rotor on. Pay attention to this area here where the adjuster is supposed to be. It needs to line up with the larger hole. Slide that right on. Should slide on nice and easy. Let's take one of these lug nuts. We're going to start it right on here to hold the rotor for us. Let's continue on with our nice rubber boot here. Just go ahead and slide it in there. That's going to protect all the internals from any debris that might try to make their way in. Let's take our bracket with our bolts. I always like to use a little bit of red thread locker on these. We'll go ahead and slide it right over the rotor. We're going to line up those bolt holes, start in both of our bolts, snug them up, then torque them to 34 foot-pounds. This one's, of course, hard to get to. Now it's going to be time to install our brake pads. We want to have the inboard pad with the wear indicator, and we want to have that wear indicator facing up. If you have the pad with the facing down, it's not going to work right. So just go ahead and have it just like this. I'm going to slide it right into position. Do the same to the outer pad. Now we're going to move along to preparing our caliper. We want to have this caliper piston right here pressed all the way up into there. You can use a caliper depression tool like this. Get right in there. We're just going to give this a little squeeze. Push it back as far as it can go. Now we're going to use caliper grease directly on the caliper piston here. And then along the backside of each of these ears. This is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now let's slide that caliper pin right into this boot here. Work it around a little bit as we go. We're going to take this, slide it right down and over those pads. Line up the slider pin with the bracket here. Now you want to double check to make sure that the boot is sitting up and over the ear of the bracket. Like I said before, you want to make sure no moisture can make its way in. Super important. Now let's get this bolt in here. We're going to bottom this out and then we'll torque it to 20 foot-pounds. Once we have that all together, let's go ahead and remount our flex hose here. For this, I generally don't use any thread locker on it. You want to make sure that this can come out fairly easily in the future. Let's get our wheel on here. Now what we're going to do is just go ahead and snug these up. We'll get the wheel back on the ground and then we're going to torque these to 76 foot-pounds. We've got the wheel back on the ground. Let's go ahead and torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Of course, if your vehicle had the center cover, go ahead and pop that right back on. Okay friends, we got our wheel bearing back in there. What's left to do now? Now you're just going to want to go ahead and pump up your brake pedal, that way there it's nice and firm, and then take it for a road test, make sure you don't hear any funny noises.